You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. Soon we will be changing gear to go into the discussion yet about another situation where Occupy Ghana and several other persons in this country are asking whether we have become a failed state, that the state has such awesome powers and yet it's unable to use the laws it passes itself to regulate the processes of seizing galamsey equipment, and decides that it will rather use what Ashigbey describes as using illegality to fight illegality. We will get to that. But first, we are looking at the conduct of the national security in the city situation, and looking eventually, before we close on that chapter, as to what should be done so that this may be the very last, it ought to be the very last that we hear of the national security conducting itself in such a lawless manner. Okay, so you were about to make that point.
Well, the point I was going to make, the question you asked me was, the whole issue about the national public interest, and Kweku makes the fact that public, and I think in this specific case, if you have a situation, Kweku has just told us that 12 vehicles are still sitting there, which 3.43%. Yeah. That's against the 90% that we've told have been sold. Then our 35 vehicles should still be sitting there. So definitely for a journalist, you would want to really confirm this. If somebody tells you that all the vehicles have been sold, and you still also hear that there's some of them. And if you want to confirm them, and the person who told you was not candid enough to say there were some already left, that was not the person you're going to go to. So definitely, I think in terms of the ethical considerations, there definitely was a public interest for Caleb to have done that. For me, this brings about major things that we need to learn from this. The first thing is that as journalists, we need, and we need to do this for the country, we need to make sure we follow this case till there is a resolution of this problem. The fact that journalists, people are just beating, manhandled by national security has to stop. There should be ways in which we do our things that is akin to a democracy. And that does not seem to have happened. Since we left the revolutionary era, everybody has gone through it. And I think it's in the interest of politicians, first and foremost, to know that it's in their interest for this thing to be fixed. Those of them that are there now, even national security ministers, Azugus and Ks, the situation might change. And they might be the people like Iti Mensah who be sitting there and say that place was stinking. So we need to really fix it. We need to also ensure that the beating of journalists stop. And journalists need to find a way of coming together to ensure that we put systems in place. Something you and I have been discussing some of the things to do. If we don't get resolution out of this, and I do not also buy the argument of the national security being able to investigate itself. I'm currently dealing with one in which the Erastus issue, yesterday we were at the military high command and they've told us that they've done some investigation. And I told the Major General we met clearly that I left that meeting more confused than I came in. And that answers that we cannot expect people to be investigating themselves and nothing would come out of it. So I would definitely, we need to be pushing for an independent inquiry.
So Erastus issue you refer to is Erastus Asaridonko of the multimedia group who brought us the expose about some military men who were still deep, neck deep in the galamsey activity in the Ashanti region. And you know what happened? His recorders were tampered with and formatted and so on. And the military promised an investigation. They promised an investigation. So look back, how long has it been? What investigation has happened?
Some investigation they said have happened, and including the military, police, and all of that. And one of the things they established was that these were military people that were sent there at the request of the district assembly, But there are other questions that we want to answer with that. But that clearly, and you would ask yourself, that investigation that happened, Erastus was not called. So if we do this national security one and it's also just done at their end, really we will not solve it. So I think it's in the interest of Ghana, in the interest of all of us, this investigation is an independent investigation. And I think organizations such as the Parliament themselves should look into this. SRAG should also look into it. But it is important that national security elect an independent body completely to really look into this. And then for us as journalists, there are a lot of learnings that we need
in the Emmanuel Ajafo case, the modern Ghana journalist, of course, one took a civil suit, and we are still in court. I'm his lawyer.
Yeah.
Now, the ministry issued a statement. If you take that statement and compare it to what they have issued, the
template,
it's almost the same.
Template.
And they said we are going to investigate. Not a thing has been done.
So I think it would be good for journalists to go back and just look at when all of these things that are said, when they happen and investigations are said. And you see, we should be people who should be guided by outputs of these things. And you will find out that 99.9%, nothing comes out of that. It is a way just to tell you that keep quiet. Because when you go again, they'll tell you that they are investigating it. One of the things we should be seeking to do is to start elevating this conversation from just the civil suit and going to the West African court. We have seen it happen in the situation in Gambia, where the Gambia government were taken to the West African court and they were fined. I think it was $10,000, $100,000. We need to start elevating it. So if you have a situation where Latif is assaulted by a state institution, if you have the situation, Pius currently was shot by a national security operative, if you have situations where the modern Ghana people, we need to start saying that if it will not be dealt with nationally, let's go internationally. And then it would force our national body to start dealing with this situation. Okay. We need to also start teaching journalists a lot more about how to fight, come together, and two, how to also handle yourself. Definitely there are a lot of lessons that Caleb should have taught us about the way not to do some of these investigative pieces. But critically, one of the challenges that we are facing as a media is that now you are finding out that our reportage is now basically assignment ridden. Our reportage is now just your PR stories, but the critical stories that have to be told, and that's the posture of journalists. The Constitution tells us that we're supposed to hold leadership to account. And for me, I define leadership very broadly. It's not just political leadership. It's all kind of leadership. And that will not happen. There's a media house that I know that has set up an investigative body. But currently, as we speak, all of those investigators, and they recruited even investigative journalists. Those investigative people, they are not writing anything like that because, and sometimes it's self-censorship by those of the people who are editors. And so the Kwekubakus and the like, you need to ensure that you don't become extinct, that now nobody is replacing you, and that should be a cause of worry for all of us. And that will not happen if we continue to see activities like this where those who attempt to do investigative journalism are beating the way they are done, because the freedom of the media, the freedom of the press, it's not something just for the media. It's for all of us. Because in this country, when things happen to people like Azugus and things when they leave power, they are not going to call any lawyer or anything. The first people they'll place a call to is the media house. So we all need to ensure that we can guarantee that space so that it will all inure to our democracy and the health of all of us.
So we go to Professor Odrigadzikpo. She spoke about journalistic ethics and the methods that we use, as well as the questions of safety. And then I'll ask Kwekutu and ask Audrey, what should be the way forward? What should we do about this? Or beyond this, what should be done? Professor Enin used the confidential. He explained it, and I have been checking. So these are the categories. Restricted, that is highly sensitive information. Confidential, which is sensitive information. Then they have what they call internal, which is non-sensitive information that is not released to the public. And then they have public, which is information that has been approved for public access. Professor Odrigadzikpo, what do you want to say about the journalistic ethics question and the methods and the questions of safety, particularly for media owners?
Okay. First of all, I just have to react to what you just read. You see that there's a category that says public, for public access. That was the last category you read.
All right.
So that press release should have had public on it because it was a public press release.
Okay.
And okay. I also think that one important point that we must make in this discussion is the fact that the actions of the national security as we see it are deliberate, not against one journalist, but against the entire a profession. It's meant to intimidate. It's meant to have a chilling effect on journalism so that journalists cannot do what they ought to be doing, which is be investigative, especially of certain institutions that think that they are above the law, like national security. I think that when it comes to journalistic ethics, Kweku Baku said it, and Ken Ashigbey has also said it, is that the rules of journalism allow for undercover journalism. We would not have transformations in our societies if journalists are not able to go undercover to do stories. And even though there are ethical canons, and they're supposed to respect those ethical canons, there are always caveats, so that you go through a certain exercise in your mind or in the newsroom, if it's a teamwork, to say, is this in the national interest? Is it in the public interest? If it is, how so? And therefore, how do we then approach this story to get at the truth? Journalism is about truth. It's about verification. It's not about taking official statements on the surface and deciding that it is true or not. We expect our journalists, and often my frustration is that we're so used to routinized stories, event-driven. So you wait till you're invited to an event, or you routinely cover, you ask for reaction, they give you a statement, you publish it. But what we should expect from journalism, good journalism, is that the journalist will go beyond that to independently verify whether the claims that are being made are true or not. And that's why I think, therefore, that there was merit in what Caleb did. Right. It is true that he was told that the cars have been disposed of. He does not need to take it on face value. He needs to make sure that he verifies whether that statement is true or not. So that verification is important. Now, the way in which he did it may be of concern, but is there some other way? As you, Samson, yourself said, the judge asked you, those who are involved in corruption thrive in the darkness. They are not about to give you easy access to come and expose wrongdoing. That's why I come back to safety of journalists and the obligations of the newsrooms to show journalists how to properly do investigative pieces without putting themselves in harm's way. And in this case, for example, I asked myself, couldn't it have been possible to use some long lenses from a neighboring house, because this was in the compound, it wasn't inside the building itself, to take those pictures? So I think that the profession must explore ways in which, today with all kinds of technology, you can surreptitiously obtain information that is in the public interest without endangering yourselves. You can have concealed cameras, for example, that are used in investigative journalism, But so train your journalists properly so that they are not caught. I mean, Caleb was talking about, it looks like when he was taking the pictures, it was quite easy to see that he was taking pictures of the place, So they need training, and I think that I cannot say it enough. The media houses have an obligation to train their journalists, because we need entrepreneurial journalism, enterprise journalism, not journalism from officialdom saying they are doing A, B, C, D, because we cannot transform our country if that's what we reduce the role of the media to.
You said at the outset that there is obvious crisis of impunity that the minister and government must address. He should be held accountable. How?
How? Well, we can start by saying that Parliament ought to invite the minister to speak to this issue. So that's a level of accountability. But two, I like what Ken says, the journalistic fraternity led by the GJA should come together and have a strategy of making sure that this story is not killed, not because it's an individual story, but it is an exemplar of a larger problem. And again, you've cited a lot of instances where journalists have been abused. So it should not die. It should go to civil court. I think that you are a lawyer. I hope that we can sue the Ministry of National Security and all the individuals that were implicated individually and severally. They ought to be sued because we also need the courts in this suit to clarify for us what these operatives can and cannot do. So we need that clarification so that they know themselves.
All right.
But we also really need to ask the Minister for National Security to transform. You see, what pains me is that under the NPP government of President Kufuor, criminal libel was repealed.
Right.
And it sent a strong signal that the actions of journalists, whether it is justified or unjustified, because of course, in the course of news gathering and production, errors can occur. And that's why journalistic rights have to be protected. We're not saying that journalists do not err, they do err. But when they err, what should happen to them? And it is clear from the repeal of the criminal law, it's clear from our constitution that when journalists they should not be treated like criminals. They should not be criminalized. We should never have a journalist handcuffed because of what they did in the course of doing their work. There are procedures for that. Take them to court.
Okay.